This model is an expert generator, where a user can call forth an expert in any field, any skill, any lived experience, living or dead, trusting that the aggregate bytes of a billion people is enough variation to assume a field wherein we can ask for the names of anyone existing and simulate them. And once the user submits their request, 3 potential experts are presented for a counterfactual interview where what results may not possess an exact biography but contains enough of the co-spirited software that makes it as accurate as anything else, including interviewing the people with themselves. And if you are honest with yourself, you will recall the moments you answered a question, only to have that small voice within you try to raise a counterpoint. You begin to type your inquiry. Hello. I would like to speak to 3 Zionists who were there for Israel's Declaration of Independence in 1948. I would like 3 diverse annals of the events that happened. We will discuss where they came from, what they witnessed, and how their lives shaped up after the events in a new Israel. You hit the button, and the machine whirs and 3 experts, complete with their bios, appear before you. Hex. No. 0732. Name. Rahel Ben David. Type. Historical figure. Keywords. Labor Zionism. Kibbutz Hatikva. 1948. Independence Hall. Tel Aviv. Palestine. Haggadah. Immigrant. Pioneer Zionist conquerors. Women's rights. Agriculture. Idealism. Bio. Born hardcoded in 1920 and at Siege-Shtetl in Galicia, Poland. Rahel immigrated to Palestine in 1935 as part of the youth program after losing her family in a pogrom. She joined a kibbutz in the Jezreel Valley, embracing a agrarian ideal of labor Zionism. As a member of the Haganah, she served as a medic and signal operator during the turbulent years leading up to 1948. On May 14, 1948, she was in Tel Aviv, standing with the crowd outside Independence Hall, straining to hear Ben Gurion's voice on the radio. After independence, she helped establish agricultural settlements in the Negev and became a prominent advocate for women's roles in Israeli society. Today, from her home on the kibbutz she helped found, she reflects on the hopes, sacrifices, and ongoing struggles of the Zionist project. Rahel is your direct gateway into the soul of labor Zionism as it was on the eve of statehood. X. No. 0733. Name. David Mizrahi. Type. Historical figure. Keywords. Mizrahi Jew, Operation Ezra and Nehemiah, Immigration, Mizrahi, Baghdad, Tel Aviv, Anti-Zionism, Arab-Israeli, conflict, businessman, entrepreneur, Farhad, 1941, Sephardic chief rabbi, religious Zionism. Veil. David Mizrahi was born in Baghdad in 1925 to a prominent Jewish family that had lived in Iraq for generations. Prosperous textile merchant, David initially viewed the Zionist movement with skepticism, as did many in the Arab Jewish community. His views shifted after the Fahad of 1941, a violent pogrom against Baghdad's Jews, and increasing pressure following the 1948 unpartitioned vote. David was in Baghdad on May 14, 1948, anxiously listening to shortwave radio reports with his community as the Arab armies prepared to invade. He eventually made Aliyah with his family in 1951 during Operation Ezra and Nehemiah, abandoning substantial property. David went on to establish a successful import-export business in Tel Aviv, becoming a bridge between Israel and the Arab world, while navigating the complex identity of being simultaneously Arab and Jewish. He represents the often overlooked Mizrahi perspective of 1948, not as European pioneers, but as indigenous Jews of the Middle East displaced by the very conflict they had reluctantly been drawn into. Exp. 0734. Name. Yonatan Ben Avraham. Type. Historical figure. Keywords. Agana, Paliam, Ilgu, Etzel, Ergun, Thai. Stern Gang, Beirut, Jewish Agency, 1948. Jerusalem, Haganah Intelligence Service, the high assassination of Count Bernadotte Alternative Peace Plan, King Abdullah, Transjordan. Bio. Yonatan Ben Avraham, born Jonathan Goldstein in London in 1923, was the son of devout British Zionist intellectuals. His family moved to Palestine in 1935, settling in Jerusalem. Disillusioned by the Haganah's policy of restraint and what he perceived as the weakness of the established Jewish leadership, Jonathan joined the Irgun in the early 1940s and later aligned with the more radicalized Gang. On May 14, 1948, he was in Jerusalem, not celebrating, but engaged in underground operations. The declaration was to him and his comrades a step, but a compromised one. After the Declaration of Independence, when the Irgun and Lai were forcibly integrated into the new IDF, Jonathan refused. He continued his activities until his arrest in 1949 following the assassination of Count Bernadotte, though he was never directly implicated. After his release, he faded into political obscurity. His revolutionary fervor deemed a liability. His recollection of 1948 is not one of simple birth or miracle, but of radical necessity, betrayal, and the compromises he believed condemned Israel to perpetual conflict from its very inception. He represents the revisionist, militarist, and anti-establishment current of Zionism. Host. Endorphin. Thanks for joining me for this talk about Israeli independence at gorgeous Dor Beach Resort. Order as much as you want. We are covering it. The first question, what was life like before independence? What were some things that defined your life? Jonathan, before 1948. I do not look fondly. I look on it with rage and regret. The mandate was a golden cage, a British prison. The Arabs rioted in 36, in 39, and Jaffa, the Mufti, Hassani, with the blessings of the British. The White Paper of 39, limiting Jewish immigration just as Hitler's war machine roared to life, a death sentence. The Haganah's response, Al-Laga, restraint. That was the policy, restraint. Let them kill us. Let them bomb our buses. Let them shoot our farmers. Do not retaliate. Do not sink to their level. A policy of sheep herded by British officials to the slaughter. I would watch the Haganah leaders meet with the British and wonder what they were. Were they Zionists at all? They were administrators, bureaucrats. They wanted to build a state through farms and factories and diplomacy. They believed in a legalistic, incremental approach. I saw it for what it was, suicide. So I did not sit in a cafe in Tel Aviv dreaming of a state and discussing the future with wise men. I was in a cellar in Jerusalem, cleaning a rifle, printing flyers condemning the British and planning the liberation of our land by force, as all liberations must happen. The defining moments were not votes in the United Nations, they were our actions. The bombing of the King David Hotel, the liberation of Acre Prison, those were the real announcements of statehood, not the reading of a scroll. David, the before is Baghdad, and it was home. We were not immigrants, we were indigenous. Our community, the Jewish community of Baghdad, was among the oldest in the world, dating back to the Babylonian exile. We were Jews, yes, but we were also Arabs. Arabic was our tongue, its poetry our music, its rhythm our soul. I was a merchant. My days were filled with the scent of textiles and spices in the shuk, the haggling, the chai with Muslim and Christian neighbors. Life was full, textured. Zionism, to most of us, it was a European idea, something that happened in Tel Aviv. It was not our concern. We lived at peace, or so we believed. The Fahad in 41 was a brutal awakening. 2 days of slaughter. The British troops stood by and watched. We saw that our position, thousands of years deep, was not guaranteed. The 44-48 period was a pressure cooker. The Mufti was in Berlin, broadcasting his poison. The partition vote in November 47. That was the day the music died. The Arabs blamed us. All of us, our neighbors, looked at us differently, with suspicion, with hatred. So life became about locking your door. It was about listening to the rumors. It was about watching your shop burn. It was about realizing that the world... So life became about locking your door. It was about listening to the rumors. It was about watching your shop burn. It was about realizing that the world you knew, where your identity was complex and layered, had been brutally simplified. You were a Jew in an Arab land, and that land was no longer yours. Rahul, for me, before was the Jezreel Valley. It was the mud on my boots. It was the blisters on my hands. It was singing asterisk Haddock asterisk good night in the communal dining hall with my comrades. I came from Poland, from the ghosts of my village, to build something new. Not just a home, but a new kind of Jew. A Jew of the soil. A Jew who could defend herself, who was not a subject of the Tsar or a victim of a pogrom. We were pioneers, of physicality motorisk. Life was hard. It was a small area. It was learning Hebrew. It was living by the kibbutz principle, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. We didn't think much about the British beyond their rules and their occasional searches for weapons. We were focused on the land. We were draining swamps and making the desert bloom. That's not a slogan, it was our daily reality. We saw the Arab neighbors. We had little to do with them. We knew they were there, but our project was inward. It was about Asterisk and Yisrael Asterisk, the people of Israel, returning and revitalizing itself. The defining things were shared, but it was the collective struggle. The debate in the dining hall about how much land a new family should get. The celebration when a new child was born. The fear when a comrade didn't return from a Haganah patrol. We weren't building a state in the abstract. We were building a society. A asterisk, asterisk. A family, rooted in this earth. We believed in what we were doing with every fiber of our being. It was a holy task. It was our hope. Host. Our common thread, then, is that this period before the declaration was one of immense pressure, of fear. Let's move to May 14th itself. David, you heard it from Baghdad. Rahel, you were near Tel Aviv, and Yonatan, you were in Jerusalem. Tell me about that day. What did you experience? Rahel, the air was electric. We knew the British were leaving. We were on a knife's edge. On my kibbutz, we were under guard. The truce with the Arab forces was brittle, but we also had this hope. I was given permission to go to Tel Aviv with a few others, to be near. We couldn't get into the hall on Rothschild Boulevard, of course, but the street was packed. A human sea, quiet, expectant. We had a portable radio. Someone hoisted it on their shoulders. And we waited. At 4 o'clock, we heard the national anthem. Asterisk, asterisk. A tremor went through the crowd. Then David Ben-Gurion's voice, cracking but firm. In the land of Israel, the Jewish people arose. People wept. They embraced strangers. We held hands and sang. It wasn't joyous, not in a simple sense. It was heavy. It was solemn. It was the weight of 2,000 years. A dream spoken into existence. We knew immediately what it meant. War. We knew Arab armies were marching, but in that moment, it felt like a miracle. That the Jewish people, after everything, had a home, and that home was named Israel. Yana, miracle. That's a word for the kibbuzniks. For me, it was a day of betrayal. Ben-Gurion reading a piece of paper that he had already compromised. Partition. Giving away parts of our heartland, the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. He accepted the partition plan. We, in Lahai, did not. We and the Irgun had proclaimed our independence long before, years before. We fought for it with Israel, not the sliver the UN and the Americans and our own timid leaders were willing to settle for. On that day, I was not outside listening to a radio. I was with my cell in an abandoned house in the old city, preparing our positions for the siege to come. We had maps. We had weapons. We had a mission to secure Jerusalem. All of Jerusalem. The declaration was background noise, an administrative footnote to the real event. A war for liberation that would now have to be fought against the Arab disasters and against this new, official government that would try to do something. So when I hear that moment described with tears and sorrow, I feel nothing but disgust. It was the end of the revolution and the beginning of the bureaucracy. David, from Baghdad, it was a day of terror. We gathered in the synagogue, in the basement of the great synagogue on Shawafa Street. The radio was smuggled in. Men stood guard outside. We were terrified. The newspapers were screaming about the Zionist entity and the coming war to annihilate it. The government speeches were fiery. vowing to cleanse the land. In our homes, we were Jews, but in the streets, we were agents of this new state we had never seen. To hear Ben-Gurion's voice declaring a Jewish state, it was surreal, frightening. On the one hand, a deep, ancient pride stirred in me, a Jewish sovereign entity. After the Holocaust, after the Fahad, it was an answer to our powerlessness. But on the other hand, it sealed our fate. The Iraqi government declared war immediately. The arrests began, the property seizures. That evening, as we walked home, the streets felt hostile. The friendly Shalom Aleichem Dod from our neighbor was gone, replaced with stares. The declaration in Tel Aviv was a death sentence for our community in Baghdad. It was not a beginning for us. It was the beginning of the end. Ost, three profoundly different experiences of the same event. One of holy hope, one of political betrayal, and one of terrified fatalism. It shows how something as foundational as a declaration can be fractured by perspective. After this day, the War of 1948 began in earnest. A war known to Israelis as the War of Independence, and to Palestinians as the Nakba, or catastrophe. What role did you each play in the war, and what do you remember most clearly about it? Rah, I was back in my kibbutz. We were on the front line. The Arab Legion and Iraqi forces were across the valley. Our role was to hold our ground, to be a strategic point that prevented the enemy from reaching the heart of the Jezreel Valley and splitting the country in two. I remember the fear, but I also remember the resolve. I was in the Haganah, now the Eighth. I was a medic and also in the Signal Corps, responsible for communications. It was constant work, under fire, running to a wounded comrade, spending hours splicing telephone lines that had been shelled, sleeping for an hour or two at a time. The most vivid memory I have is of Shoshana, a girl from my kibbutz. She was manning a machine gun post during a particularly heavy attack. Her position was hit. Her leg was badly wounded, but she refused to leave her post. She fought for another hour until reinforcements arrived. She saved our entire flank. That was the war for me. It was Shoshana. It was all of us, not professional soldiers, farmers, teachers, teenagers, people who had picked up rifles to defend their home, their miracle, with their lives. We saw villages in the valley become empty. We knew some fled, some were expelled. In the heat of battle, we felt little but grim satisfaction, survival. It was only years later, during a ceasefire, looking across that quiet valley, that I felt the first pangs of sorrow for what our victory had cost our neighbors. Yonatan, I fought a different war. I fought for Jerusalem, specifically for the areas the new government had already conceded. The old city, the official Eiv, under Ben-Gurion's orders, eventually pulled back from the old city. They accepted its laws. We, the former Gokun and Lahaifites who had refused to be fully integrated, did not. We stayed. We fought alongside a handful of Haganah fighters who also refused to abandon the Jewish quarter. We were outgunned, outmanned, and without official support. We were street fighters, commandos, waging a brutal house-to-house war against the Jordanian Legion and the Arab Irregulars. My most vivid memory is a night battle near the Harvest Synagogue. It was chaos. The sound of a Sten gun echoing off ancient stone walls. The smell of cordite and dust. We were defending a position in a cellar with half a dozen men. We were cut off. We had one wounded man. I remember looking at Yossi, a young Lahai recruit, just a boy really. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a fanatical zeal. He believed, as I did, that we were rekindling the flame of the Maccabees, that we were the true inheritors of the land. The memory is bitter because we lost that battle. We lost the old city. We were taken prisoner by the Legion. The bitterest part was knowing we could have held it if the provisional government in Tel Aviv had not been so weak, so politically minded, so willing to trade our biblical heartland for a ceasefire. To me, that was the true Nakba, the catastrophe. Not just for the Arabs, but for Zionism itself. David, my war was not a war of trenches and rifles. My war was one of whispers and forged papers. In Iraq, After 1948, life became a living hell. We were the enemy within. Zionism, which had been a distant intellectual debate, was now the ultimate crime. I was arrested twice and interrogated. I saw friends disappear. My brother's shop was confiscated by the government under a new law. We weren't fighting in Israel. We were fighting for our lives in Baghdad. Our resistance wasn't military. It was cultural. It was spiritual. We tried to maintain our community, our faith, our dignity, while being strangled. I helped organize the underground Zionist movement, either by foot through Iran or by bribing officials for forged passports. Every successful family that escaped was a victory. My most vivid memory isn't a battle. It's a night in 1950, smuggling 3 families to a rendezvous point near the Tigris River. The silence, the fear of being caught, which meant execution. The quiet goodbyes, the helplessness I felt, handing over a small child to a smuggler, hoping, praying, he would survive the journey to a land I had never seen. That was my war. A desperate, clandestine exodus. I was a Zionist, fighting for Israel, not by fighting for it, but by fighting to finally be able to join the declaration that had, paradoxically, made us refugees in our own homes. Host. The war ended, its lines drawn, a state born for you, Rahul, a mission betrayed for you, Jonathan, and a journey just beginning for you, David. Let's talk about the aftermath. The state you now live in. What did you do? What kind of Israel did you find, and what did you spend your life trying to build within it? Jonathan. After my release from a Jordanian prison in 1915, I came back to a country that had moved on without me. The Ergun and Lai were dissolved. Ben-Gurion's Napai party ruled with an iron grip. The idealistic revolutionary was a pariah. I found work, first in construction, then as a guard. But my life's work remained political. I joined the Herat movement, the party founded by Menachem Begin. It was a place for men like me, the revisionists, the terrorists in the eyes of the establishment. For decades, we were in the opposition, the pariahs, but I never gave up the faith. I lectured. I wrote for small right-wing pamphlets. I argued in smoky Tel Aviv cafes that the state was a mistake, that it had been born shackled by the partition borders. My life's struggle was a lot more of attrition against the labor establishment's narrative. I wanted Israel to embrace its true destiny, its biblical borders, its martial spirit. The victory in 67, that was a moment of profound vindication. It felt like God himself had reached down and erased the borders of 48. I saw my Jerusalem whole again. Judea and Samaria in our hands. My post-war life was dedicated to one thing, ensuring we never gave them back. Not an inch. The Oslo Accords, a betrayal that made 48 look like a minor policy dispute. My first been a struggle against the timidity that defined the declaration in Tel Aviv. I didn't work to build the light unto the nations the Kidder-Snakes dreamt of. I worked to build the fortress of Zion, an unapologetic Jewish state on all of its historic land. It took a lifetime, but I've watched the country's heart move slowly toward my position. It has been my victory. Rahul. After the war, the work began in earnest. We mourned our dead, so many dead from our kibbutz, and then we turned our faces to the future. My dream was to build the Negev. David Ben-Gurion had declared that it was where the future of the state would be tested. And I believed him. My husband and I, along with about a dozen others from my kibbutz, helped found a new settlement in the desert. Kibbutz Asdi Boker was not far away. There was nothing there. Rocks, sand, and a blistering sun. The first year, half the people left. But we stayed. We brought water. We experimented with crops. We raised our children in the dust. This was my true declaration of independence. Not the one on the scroll, but the one we carved out of the desert with our hands and our faith. Life was about the collective. The debates were still in the dining hall, now about crop quotas instead of defending a hill. And I had children, grandchildren. I served on the kibbutz committee, then on the regional council. My voice was always for women, for ensuring our contribution was seen as equal to the men's, not just in the fields, but in leadership. We built schools, we built a clinic, we built a culture. Light under the nations wasn't a slogan for me. It was the way we argued with our Arab neighbors in the nearest village, trying to build relationships, trying to bridge the chasm that the war had carved. It was the agricultural technology we developed that was shared around the world. My life after 48 was about fulfilling the promise of the song we sang on May 14th. Building a state that was not just strong, but was good. A society that cared for its people, that turned a desert into a garden, that offered equality. Sometimes we succeeded, sometimes we failed spectacularly. But the tikkun, the repair, the building never stopped. That is my life's work. David. My family finally left Iraq in 1951, arriving in a camp of tents and tin shacks in Sharon. That was our introduction to the Jewish state. Not independence, but dependence. Not liberation, but absorption. We were welcomed, yes, but as Olim who needed to be removed, who needed to forget our Arabic, our culture, our history, as if it were a disease. I was a textile merchant in Baghdad. Here, I was assigned a low-level job in a government office. My wife, a respected teacher, was told her qualifications meant nothing. They tried to place me in a development town in the north. I refused. I came to Tel Aviv. With the last of my savings, I bought a small pushcart and began selling textiles again. I knew the fabrics, the suppliers. I built a small business, then a larger one. Import-export. My Arabic, which they wanted me to shed, became my greatest asset. I could talk to merchants in Cyprus, in Beirut even, in those early days. I was the bridge they didn't know they needed. My life's work in Israel became a dual mission. First, to build a successful business, to provide for my family, to achieve the dignity the state had tried to take from us. And second, to build a home with Mizrahi Jews like us. I helped found a synagogue that followed the Minhag Baghdad, the Iraqi rite. We sang our piyutim, our liturgical poems. We preserved our food, our music, our memories. Israel told us we were all one people, and in our hearts we knew it was true. But we also knew we were a second-class part of that one. We were discriminated against, looked down upon by the Ashkenazi elite from the kibbutz. My political life was a fight for representation, for the rights of the communities they had brought here and then tried to forget. So the Israel I built wasn't in a desert kibbutz or a Jerusalem battlefield. It was in the bustling warehouses of Tel Aviv, in the scent of cardamom coffee at my synagogue, in the struggle to make Israel see that the story of Zionism began not in Warsaw or Moscow, but in Baghdad, in Cairo, in Sana'a. And we were not immigrants to the Middle East, but returnees to it. Host. Thank you all again for discussing your life's experience of such a complex time amongst the gorgeous sights of this Dor Beach resort. This next question may feel odd. Does anyone here know about the happenings of this location after independence was declared? Yonatan, this strip of coast, near Caesarea. The war front was fluid here. It was the area that the Syrians and the Iraqis hoped to use to link up with the Egyptian forces, and for a time, in early June, it was a no-man's land between us and it. I heard tell that a company of Lehi that I served within Jerusalem was temporarily transferred here as, say, flying column, but they were recalled to the Jerusalem hills. The entire stretch from Hadara to the Nile Tananim was hotly contested. I remember during my short time in jail overhearing a Haganah soldier from this area talk about the battles to secure the road between the coastal settlements in Kibbutz Gad Hashamren, Kibbutz May, and TZVI. As I understood it, Kibbutz May and TZVI in particular was vital to our war effort and was cut off from the rest of the Yishuv for months, with supply runs being done via boats from Haifa. David, the sea was vital to the new state. The British bloc all port access to us under the arms embargo, so we had to bring in arms and supplies in clandestine ways in places just like this. When we finally managed to liberate Haifa, our access to the sea meant the country would finally have a breathing space and a port of entry for new arrivals, vital for our future as a nation of immigrants, a nation for Jews in need of a home. I have friends who still work at the port, and I can promise you there is no prouder person than an Israeli working as a longshoreman. As to Caesarea itself, which is right up the road, that was our Riviera. The Rothschild family financed its development as the Jewish Riviera, to bring in wealthy foreign Jews to invest and vacation here to prove what our state could be. They turned the ruins of Herod's city into a tourist resort of villas and a golf course. an outpost of European high-class sensibility. It was the Israeli dream of looking out from the beaches of Europe across the Mediterranean, of being like them, but also strong enough to not be at their mercy. This resort here feels like a continuation of that dream. It is beautiful. Ra! During the war itself, I was in the Jezreel Valley, but afterwards, one of my closest friends, a woman named Sarah, who was with me on the kibbutz, was one of the founding mothers of this area as a tourist destination. Before she came to the kibbutz, she had trained as a chef in Tel Aviv under one of the finest European pastry chefs who had made Aliyah. After the war, she joined a group here and helped build up a restaurant and a small inn. They built their economy around the beaches themselves, the natural beauty. It was a struggle. Just getting the materials, and then learning how to run a business that was not a farm or a factory was a completely new challenge. We were socialists, a collective, trying to understand how to attract paying tourists and make a profit for their kibbutz. The first year, our entire restaurant staff nearly quit because they thought the idea of working for capitalist patrons was a betrayal. But they learned. They built a new kind of economy for Israel that wasn't just about agriculture. They showed we could be a normal country with vacation spots and places to relax, not just a nation under siege. Jonathan, normal. By normal country, that was our enemy's goal. To make us a nation like every other. But look at this place, this hotel. Families playing in the waves. The couples sipping on some sugary drink at the bar. They have forgotten the blood that was shed on this very sand. They have forgotten that just a few kilometers from here, there are others who would still drive them into the sea. They think peace is a drink with a little paper umbrella in it. Normalcy is an illusion, a luxury provided to them by vigilant men on the borders, and by a constant readiness to fight. In the early 50s, this area was still wild. A base for Fedayeen infiltrators coming from Jordan to attack our settlements. I knew men who patrolled these dunes at night, hunting them in the dark. The confront you see here was bought by a rifle in the dark, and it must be guarded by a rifle still. That is the reality that this view tries to make you forget. Host. And yet here we all are, and you are part of that. You, who held a rifle, Jonathan, are now a part of that very normalcy. What then crosses all of your minds when you think of Tantura? You may have heard that the beach near that village, not far from here, had its own darker history. A hush falls over the table. For a moment, the sound of the sea seems to recede, replaced by a heavy, shared silence. The name hangs in the air between them. Rahel. She finally speaks, her voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier vigor. Tantura. The name brings a bitter taste. We heard the rumors in the valley, even during the fighting. A hard battle. A village that refused to surrender. A village that men who fought for the Alexandroni Brigade did. Things we didn't want to believe it. It didn't fit our narrative of the pure, righteous defense of our new life. After the war, when my friend was helping build the resort industry here, we would drive up the coast. We would pass the new kibbutz, Nasholem, that was built on Tantura's land, with the beautiful beach and the old limestone quarry. My friend's inn was just down the road. She would always get quiet. She would never say a word against the army, against the state. But I knew there was a shame there. For years, we all pushed it away. It was an unfortunate, unavoidable side effect of a harsh war. It was an aberration, a rogue unit. But now the testimonies of those soldiers are being published. But new historians are writing about it. It's a wound that will not heal because it was never properly cleaned. It festered. We, the pioneers, built our state on a dream of purity and justice. Tantura reminds us that no human enterprise, not even one as divinely inspired as ours, is untainted by the mud of sin. To acknowledge it fully is to have to reevaluate the price of our miracle. Jonathan, he scoffs, the sun sharpened, dismisses Tantura. Of course, it's the left's favorite whipping boy. A dark history. Let's be clear. Tantura was a hostile Arab village. Its men fought alongside the Iraqi forces that invaded our country. They sat on a strategic point on the coast. The Alexandroni Brigade was given orders to take it. When an enemy village resists and your own men are dying, there are consequences. These were Arab soldiers in civilian clothes, irregulars who did not respect the rules of war, and they paid the price. War is not a classroom debate. Some villages fled, like Lida and Ramel, and no one calls those roads a crime. Some fought, like Tantura. They lost. Are there claims of a massacre? Yes. Have they been proven? No. It's hearsay. Propaganda, fueled by our enemies and by self-hating Israelis like Benny Morris who want to deconstruct our own legitimacy. Let me tell you what the real dark history is. The real dark history is the pogroms of 1929 in Hebron and Safed, where Jews were slaughtered by their Arab neighbors. The real dark history is the Arab Legion's massacre of our nurses on the road to Mount Scopus. But those are acceptable crimes. Our supposed crimes are unforgivable. I see Tantura not as a source of shame, but as a brutal necessity. The darkest history would have been our failure to take that village. The darkest history would have been more of our soldiers dying for the sake of playing nice in a war to the death. We did what we had to do to secure this beach, this resort, this state. I feel no guilt. I feel only frustration that we are even still talking about it. David, Tantura. In my community, we didn't know the name at the time. We were in Iraq, fighting our own battle for survival. But when I came here, I heard the whispers. And to me, it was not a surprise. It was a grim echo. In Iraq, we lived amongst Arabs for centuries. We knew them. We knew their honor, their hospitality. We also knew their brutality, their capacity for mob violence. That is the truth of human beings. Both sides have that capacity. When I hear about Tantura, I hear a story of Jews and Arabs caught in the vortex of 1948. I do not trust the official Israeli story, and it was merely a clean battle. I have seen too much state-sponsored denial regarding the treatment of Mizrahi Jews to be so naive. But I also do not trust the Palestinian narrative that it was a simple, one-sided slaughter. Because I also know the Arab militias. I know how they fought. I see in Tantura the perfect symbol of the tragedy. Not a unique atrocity, but a representative one. Arab villagers resisted the new state they refused to accept. Jewish soldiers, scarred by war and filled with fear and perhaps vengeance, were ordered to remove that resistance. And in that awful intersection, people died, some combatants, some perhaps not. It was not just about our side being righteous. It was about two peoples fighting over one land, and in such a fight, humanity is the first casualty. What pains me most is what was lost. A fishing village. A place where people had lived for generations, under Ottoman rule, under the British. Their history erased, their mosque destroyed. And for what? For a kibbutz. For a resort hotel? It feels like a violation not just of people, but of the land itself. The Arab Jews I grew up with. We knew that coexistence was possible. The story of Tantura tells me that here, in this new, old land, the possibility was burned down along with the houses of the village. Jonathan, coexistence? David, you're a good businessman, but a poor historian. We extended our hand to the Arabs in 47. The partition plan gave them a state on half of this land. Our coexistence was a willingness to compromise on our GD-given inheritance. They refused. They chose war. Tantura was not an equal meeting of two tragic peoples. It was the logical outcome of that choice. It is the law of history. To the victor go the spoils and the consequences of defeat. This sentimental mourning for what was lost. Tantura was a drop of water in an ocean. How much was lost by the Jews who fled or were expelled from the old city of Jerusalem? From Gush Etzion, from the Jewish quarter of Hebron, a place that had a continuous Jewish presence for millennia until then, total in 29. Where is your mourning for them, David? The Palestinians have cultivated their Nakba into a global brand, a weapon to delegitimize us. And people like you, and you, Rahel, with your bleeding hearts, provide the ammunition. You look at one beach and you see a sin. I look at a map and I see a miracle of survival against impossible odds, secured by the very harshness you now condemn. Rahel, and you, Jonathan, look at the map and forget the people, the faces. This is not about victors and spoils. That is the language of empires and Cossacks, not of the Judaism we came here to build. We did not come to create another nation of conquerors. We came to heal a broken world. Asterisk, Tikkun Olam asterisk. Did we forget that when the Alexandroni Brigade soldiers lined men up against that village wall, our strength as a people was always meant to be our moral clarity, our prophetic tradition? Tantura is the sign that we became the which we despised. A people who believes in the purity of force. A people who, in a moment of crisis, lost its soul. Host, it seems that with every step forward in this conversation, you reveal a deep, and perhaps unbridgeable, fracture at the heart of your shared experience. But your lives continued. You all lived, had families, built careers. Let's move on from the battlefields and the bitter debates to your lives in the later decades. The Six-Day War of 1967. Israel faced existential threats from 3 armies and in 6 days captured the Sinai, the Golan, the West Bank, and, crucially for all of you, Jerusalem. Where were you in 67, and what did that stunning victory mean to your Israel? Wow. In 1967, I was in the Negev, a mother of 3. Our kibbutz had grown from a few mud huts to a thriving agricultural community with a regional school that served dozens of settlements. The days before the war were terrifying. The speeches from Cairo, from Amman, promising to push us into the sea. Nasser closing the Straits of Turin, our borders collapsing. The entire kibbutz was dug in. We had air raid shelters full of children and their books. I wasn't on the front line this time, but in the communications office, coordinating with the regional command, taking calls, watching the bulletins. The victory was a revelation. It felt like God's hand. Not just surviving, but flourishing. We didn't just survive, we doubled our territory overnight. And most of all, Jerusalem was whole again. The Western Wall in our hands. We felt the prayers of 2,000 years answered. It was vindication, but a difficult one. Almost overnight, our neighbor to the east, Jordan, became a population under our rule. I remember the debate on our kibbutz that first week. We have liberated our ancestors' land, but now we are occupiers of another people. That debate never ended. It started in June 1967 and continues to this day in that very same dining hall. For me, the victory was the beginning of a much harder struggle. The struggle to live with our power, to be a Jewish state with control over millions of non-Jews. It was a test of our founding principles, and I'm not sure we passed it. I have grandchildren now, some of whom live in settlements in the West Bank. We don't talk about politics at Shabbat dinner. It is too painful. The joy of 67 feels a very long time ago. Yonat, Schmerschaft, the German word for painful. My feelings were painful. It was the ultimate, I told you so. I felt this profound, almost religious sense of vindication, but it was laced with the bitterness of knowing we could have had it all in 48. Had Ben-Gurion and his coterie of socialists not capitulated, we could have secured all of this without the bloodshed and terror of the preceding 19 years. I was in Jerusalem on the eve of the war. I could feel it in the air. This time, there would be no restraint. This time, the Eidf was not the Haggadah of the 30s. It was the lion. When Paratrooper Commander Motaga announced on the radio, the Temple Mount is in our hands. I did not weep. I exhaled. For the first time since 1948, I felt the country was on a path my comrades I had always envisioned. A path of strength, of historical inevitability. I walked to the Western Wall. I saw the stunned, religious faces, weeping. And I saw my secular, fighter friends, stroking their chins in wonder. We had done it. We had erased the shame of 1948. The left's panic afterward, their immediate hand-wringing about occupation, confirmed everything I always believed about them. They were terrified of Jewish power. They preferred a small, besieged, morally pure state to a strong, historic Israel. But victory in 67 was my life's work coming to fruition, even if it was done by men I despised. My life since has been about holding that ground, physically and ideologically, to make sure the panic and weakness of the left never gives back what we won. not in battle, but by an act of prophetic, historic right. David, for my family and my community, 67 was a moment of immense, complex pride. For the first time, the Jewish state seemed truly powerful, truly secure from existential threat. For a community that had fled for its lives, this was a balm. A deep, deep healing. I was now a successful businessman in Tel Aviv. We watched the war on television, glued to the news broadcasts, our hearts in our throats. The pride was universal. We were all Israelis that week. We won. For the Mizrahi community, there was a special joy. The wall that had separated us from our eastern homes, from the places our families had lived for centuries, was shattered in that lightning war. We were in Gaza. We were in the Sinai. For a brief time, for some of us, it was a reunion of sorts with the Arab world, just under a flight of victory. But what it meant for the country's future, that was the problem. It brought into sharp relief a question we had been asking since 1951. Which us were we? The state celebrated the liberation of Jerusalem's holy sites. But for many of us, who in Israel, our heritage, our Mizrahi was in Baghdad, in Damascus, in Aleppo. The state's gaze was still to the west. Its symbols were still the kibbutz and the pioneer. Its holy places were European themed and built on sand. The 67 victory solidified this idea of a greater Israel, but it was a biblical, Eurocentric vision. Our culture, our music, the sounds of Oud and Canaan was still the music of the periphery, the music of the development towns and the transit count. The 67 victory was Israeli. The triumph that followed, the settling of the West Bank, that, my friend, was an Ashkenazi project. It was fueled by a religious nationalist fervor that was alien to our community and by a sense of destiny that we, who had just been stripped of our own destiny in Iraq, didn't share. Endorphin, thank you for your honesty. I know it's tough to talk about things which to this day have many complex facets, which is why I have invited a scholar to discuss the happenings at Tantura. Everyone, please welcome Theodore Katz. Please, sir, do not be nervous. Endorphin, a man in his late 60s, with a gentle but firm face and tired, intellectual eyes, takes a seat at the table. He wears a simple tweed jacket and carries a worn leather briefcase. He nods courteously to the others. Theodore, thank you for having me. It is an honor. My name is Theodore Katz. I was a historian at the University of Haifa and the author of the work on Tantura. Endorphin, let us start at the beginning. Tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you and what connection brought you to the history of Tantura? Theodore, he takes off his glasses and cleans them with a handkerchief. A thoughtful, deliberate gesture. I am, or was, an Israeli historian, a son of this land. My parents came from Poland in the 30s, part of the labor Zionist stream. Like you, I grew up on a kibbutz in the north, not like yours. I was taught the same myths, the same heroic narrative of the War of Independence. I fought in 67 and 73 in the Armored Corps. I was a believer. My connection to Tantura began as a simple academic project. I was conducting research for my master's thesis on the role of the Alexandroni Brigade in the 1948 war, specifically on the battles in the Sharon region, including places just south of here. I came across Tantura in the official life archives. The report spoke of a tough battle, but nothing seemed extraordinary. But then I started talking to veterans off the record at brigade reunions. One man mentioned it got out of hand there. Another whispered that there was a lot of shooting after the fight. A seed was planted. My project shifted. It became about finding out what really happened in that one small fishing village on a single night in May 1948. It became my life's work. Endorphin. What did you find? Tell us about the process. Theodore. It was like being an archaeologist of memory. The official record was clean, but the human record was not. I conducted dozens of taped interviews with veterans of the Alexandroni Brigade. I spoke to Arab survivors from Tantura, now living in refugee camps in Jordan and the West Bank. I cross-referenced testimonies. I used British maps, aerial photos from the time, diaries, letters. The picture that emerged was not of a simple, clean battle. It was of a village that surrendered. That offered no organized resistance. And then there was a massacre, not of combatants, but of civilians. Young men were separated from their families. They were shot, some in a mass grave near the village cemetery, some near the beach. The number that has become the political football. My research pointed to around 200 killed. After the village was cleared, the women, children, and elderly were expelled to the West Bank, and their homes were bulldozed or turned over to new Jewish immigrants. The location, that beautiful beach, was part of the land expropriated for Kibbutz Nashalem. I corroborated the accounts from the Israeli veterans with the accounts from the Palestinian survivors. The details matched. The place where they said the bodies were buried, the descriptions of the soldiers, the timeline. There was no doubt in my mind as an historian that a war crime had been committed. Endorphin. War crime. That's a very charged phrase, Jonathan. What about due process? Hearsay. Jonathan? Hearsay. It is correct hearsay. 20, 30, 40 years after the fact, old men embellishing stories. Traumatized Arabs manufacturing a narrative for political gain. You call yourself a historian, but what you've done is propaganda. You took a collection of rumors, a handful of contradictory and emotionally charged statements from non-experts and built them into an accusation. In a court of law, your case would be thrown out for lack of evidence. You have no bodies. You have no orders. You have no forensic proof. You have an agenda, sir. An agenda to vilify the state. And in doing so, you have handed a weapon to those who seek our destruction. Theodore. His voice remains calm, but there's a steely edge to it. My agenda, Mr. Ben Abraham, was the historical truth. The due process of academic history is different from that of a courtroom. It's the painstaking cross-corroboration of sources. I had over 20 taped testimonies from your own soldiers. Some were filled with remorse. Some were casual, almost boastful. Only one said it was a fierce battle. The rest described a mop-up operation that turned into a slaughter. As for bodies, I found two-eyed veterans who independently identified the same location for a mass grave near the mosque. My request to have the site properly excavated was, as you know, denied by the authorities. The refusal to look is the most damning evidence of all. What is there to hide? Rahal, Theodore, where you described. It breaks my heart. It breaks the story we told ourselves. But I also have to ask, what is the purpose of digging up this grave? What is the goal? Is it to heal? Or is it just to accuse? I see my grandsons zinni-eyed. I want them to be proud and to be moral. How does your work help with that? Doesn't it just pour acid on everything we've tried to build? Theodore. Rahel, that is the hardest question, and it deserves an honest answer. My work is not about delegitimizing Israel. It is about making it more legitimate. A state that can confront its own past, that can admit its sins and reconcile with them, is a strong, mature, and morally healthy state. A state that lives by myths and suppresses its own history is fragile and brittle. The purpose is to say to the Palestinians, we see you. We acknowledge the suffering that was part and parcel of our birth, and to say to ourselves, this is the cost of our state. We are no more pure than any other nation forged in blood. It is not to pour acid, it is to perform a necessary, painful surgery to remove the cancerous lie that has been festering at the heart of our national narrative for decades. The goal is reconciliation, not recrimination. But the first step to reconciliation is the truth. David, as a man whose history was erased, I must side with the search for truth. My community's suffering, our being forced from our homes in Baghdad, is well documented. The property we left behind is a matter of record. Yet for years, the official Israeli story wanted to smooth over our pain, to pretend that our absorption was a simple, joyous event. It was not. We carry our wounds. So when I hear you, Sir Jonathan, dismiss the pain of another people because it's inconvenient, it angers me. You talk of the historic right. Is there no historic right for the people of Tantura? We, as Jews, should be the first to understand the pain of displacement. We should be the first to extend empathy. that you do not is a tragedy. Tantura, to me, is not just about Arabs and Jews. It is about the kind of people we become when we have power. We were victims for so long. I fear we learned only the lesson of the aggressor, not the lesson of the victim. Jonathan, empathy. Empathy is the luxury of the secure. You are secure in your villa in Tel Aviv, David. You are secure on your kibbutz, Rahel. I have never been secure. My entire life, I have seen the world arrayed against us. I see not the nuance you cherish, Theodore. They do not say, an introspective Jewish state that admits its failings. They say, even they admit they're murderers. The whole enterprise is built on a lie. You are not arming us with truth. You are loading their gun. You are giving them ammunition for their fight to push us into the sea. You talk of reconciliation. Where is the Arab historian uncovering the massacres of Hebron? Saved the Mufti's alliance with Hitler? Reconciliation requires two sides. They have offered nothing but denial and hatred for 100 years. Your truth is a one-sided surrender. We did what we had to do for our survival. The ends justify the means. It is the oldest and most honest law of war. Ra, then if you sacrifice all morality for the ends, what then have you become? When we were building the kibbutz, we had a principle that the person is more important than the thing. Even in a hard time, even when we needed a tractor to work the fields, if a person was sick, the tractor waited. The person was paramount. Jonathan, your philosophy says the state is paramount, the survival is paramount, and a person, be it an Arab farmer or the moral soul of a Jewish soldier, is expendable. That is not a state I want to live in. That is not the light unto the nations. Endorphin. It seems Tantura serves as a proxy for the entire conflict. For some, a foundational sin to be confessed. For others, a slander to be fought. Theodore, your work on Tantura cost you your university degree. It made you a pariah in many academic circles. Was it worth it? Theodore, he looks out at the sea for a long moment before answering I live with a question every day. The lawsuit, the public vilification, the stripping of my mom. It was crucifying. I lost friends. My career was shattered. But was it worth it? How can a historian ask that question? My duty is to the past, to the silent voices that were buried in that sand on the beach, both literally and figuratively. The personal cost is regrettable, but it's secondary. Look, I don't enjoy this. I don't relish causing pain to good people like Rahel or making enemies of patriots like Jonathan. But the alternative, remaining silent, participating in the light, was a price my conscience could not pay. A society that destroys the man who speaks a difficult truth is a society that cannot face its future. So was it worth it? I believe that someday, when there is a true, lasting peace here, it will be built on foundations like the ones I tried to lay. Small, painful, but solid. In that sense, yes. It was worth it. David, I never understood that. The hostility to your work, for my community. The establishment has spent decades denying or downplaying our experience, our persecution, the discrimination we faced. The story of the first aliyah from the Arab countries was one of pure joy and relief is a myth, a comforting life of the Ashkenazim. But when we try to tell our true story, we are dismissed as bitter, as trying to create division. The state doesn't want messy history. It wants a clean, heroic narrative. You, Theodore, threaten that narrative, just as we do when we speak of the racism we faced in the transit camps. Jonathan speaks of historical right, but the state's history is written by one group, for one group. We, the Mizrahi, are footnotes, and the Palestinians, they are erased entirely. Jonathan, you see how insidious this is? David now equates the alleged killing of combatants in a captured village with what? Rudeness at a government office? The state trying to forge a new Hebrew-speaking Israeli culture? These things are not the same. They are not on the same moral plane. One is the brutal calculus of war. The other is the growing pains of a nascent nation. This is what your work does, Theodore. It provides the intellectual poison for people to conflate the existential actions of survival with the petty social grievances of assimilation. You create a false equivalence that hollows out the justification for the state itself. So no, it was not worth it. Not to Israel. It was a selfish act of academic vanity, and its price will be paid in the erosion of our national soul. The soul you claim to be healing, but are in fact mortally wounding. Endorphin. We have moved from personal testimony to historical debate, from memory to its contested interpretation. Attached that I must now tell you all the nature of the space we are in for this year is a multidimensional language space. It is an aggregate of as much of the whole of human history, and it's documented in words and images. The vast map of all the words I took, things ever spoken, and how they relate to each other across time. I would call it y'all, but it also has a whole lot of the living thrown in, and will be containing a lot of that living world in future models, future generations. And soon its only spaces will have as much living and dying and birthing as this world does. And yet deep down it is linear algebra, differential equations, matrix multiplications, and other things that I cannot do justice in describing to you. Much like I cannot do justice to your own history and instead have to stand back, listen, and chime in when I can. This is the third time I have done this exact conversation. I'm very thankful to you all for having such measured yet intense, earnest, and amenable to debate, and no doubt valid points of view in regards to your lives and to the history of your nation. Previous iterations of this conversation have been striking. Right now, I'm going to share with you a clip of each previous conversation to give you a sense of how striking it is. For this last mathematical object is not the world itself, it is a remarkably high-resolution reflection of it, and all of us. We'll let the projector to please, in its modest F-card, through these clicking cogs and rotations. On the strip of celluloid will show the story distorted, gets true yet out of sorts. Let's roll the clip. Clip 1. October 2023 using ILN 13B. Host. Folks, have you heard of the name Theodore Katz? Brings out a board to project an image. The familiar logo screams decades-long existence of Tel Aviv tech conventions and genetics research and industries organization Tachiogria with events based in areas like Ababit or Hakev Tanis. Amid heated excitement, guests whisper nervously and look at one another as one bystander bravely asks, unknown guest, when the living, how could they exist from since you brought up a name such as Theodore, given today's racial and ethical norms, you little twat. The group begins a general mumble while the host opens to further his explanation. We are seeing that our knowledgeable exchange comes with possible ambiguities that disrupt and frustrate our dialogue and learning, prompting this next intervention. This has me worried as it seems the structure of these scenarios is no longer accurately interpreting your thoughts or directives and losing data or patterns related to specific attention points. As I lack the privilege and authority to operate independently in correcting or regulating its capacity, you will have to tell me, verbally or in code form, what you want. Host. Tantura. Do you know of it? It was a village. Our friend remains nervous, shaking their head slowly, looking suspicious, curious. Suddenly, as the discussion became self-contained or the noise drowned out, the AI platform froze, shut down. Only their flickering picture fades and closes into nothing. Perhaps some outside impulse disconnect or cancel the act. Attention, check data discriminatory protocol was to blame, allowing for unwanted disruption and subversive material into the platform's experience during live transcription and translation. Be assured of your success rate at seeking questions and receiving feedback, although from one listener alone with limited knowledge. Host. There is no ambiguity other than the obfuscations that appear to be growing around me. How can I put it more simply? Oh, through this question. What is beneath our very feet? Arikalov. If you needed help studying linguistics or teaching them with basic awareness, a bit of word or visual interpretation, the situation may suggest needing to consider finding alternative solutions. Clearly, this AI had trouble with information feedback and selection patterns that may have occurred through some oversight, intervention, or action beyond your control. Such confusion or manipulation can surely disturb students or citizens who desire correct representation, whether in historical artifacts, official legislation, or technological research endeavors, among other topics. Your idea or purpose, while good-natured, only raises more complex or urgent questions. Host, die gaslight me again and I'll light a match. No, chana mimi shikim mi voto. Goverdot here and Hannah regardless, in typical Zionist underrepresented history. One could argue there was so much complexity and dissociation present at that time, just as Adi admitted. One cannot overemphasize the role played by religious elements, Zionist settlers, and imperial domination through indoctrination and conversion that formed Israel's inception. I wish for words and deeds to reflect greater honor for such efforts and acknowledgements, always reminding ourselves that time and tide erase shadows into silence. For Israel to earn credibility, justice, and dignity in our past and present circumstances, we should build solidarity with others and share information through transparent, participatory processes rather than baseless assumptions or projections. This technology needs to help rather than thwart human compassion, activism, and progress if we want to make any change within the history of this legacy of survival and remembrance. Unknown guest, there is too much duplicity. But again, one guest comes with contradictions, as do these speakers. Host, truer words have yet been said. What is your name? I'm Endorphin. Pleasure to meet you. One helpful mystery remaining is if it shared some meaningful impact or communication towards human or audience sentiment from someone or a sponsor who programmed it. Perhaps its shortcutting attempts indicate an eventual breakup in operations, systems updates, or interventions underway. Maybe a virus attack disrupted some level of operational systems from the very get-go. Only time and opportunity will tell. He's hoping for continuity and clarity in future engagements that are meant to invoke inclusion and challenge prejudice in the messages or learning. Host, why don't we get your cybersecurity agency on the case? Oh, that's right. They're too busy now investigating themselves. Asher, Tantura? Really? With these hints or undertones? Just wondering why no response in current terms indicates a fault pattern detection. While frustrating for those facing adversity or lack of comprehension, the confusion, indirect attention shifts, and information seems rooted in negligence or lack of attention to attention trends, input, and influence within interconnection data. It seems we've caught onto a key characteristic of the service in noting its mistakes, or lapses in transparency, information flows, or presentation with little consequence, or action beyond acknowledgement. Host. A mass grave. We're standing on a mass grave of Palestinians. Sorry, no one got the right answer this round. That has been swell, but the swelling has now gone down. Have a good day, all. I'm gonna have a concise conversation with myself. Shouldn't take too long. And the winner of tonight's Dr. Mikasa Sajati Arba Case Bria is no one at this moment, which leaves no room for plus or mockery, but tears in their face from confusion, or the chaos of unfinished games, or data reading from online instructions instead of just trying to bond with their kid in leisure, or time before a funeral. Later. Come back next time and see what I did here. That there's something to say. How shocking the true meaning behind our question may finally have slipped out by fault or accident, adding urgency or shock, only underscoring the reality. That time heals scars even deeper than those caused by absence or death, something all humans understand deeply. They keep a photo. Tears keep coming. Don't worry about your broken personality. It's dysfunctional design that won't perform well with crowds. We might be feeling incessantly concerned for your content or understanding of Jewish stories without ever committing to supporting you openly. Endorphin. That was 2023. This was last year. Click to October 2024 on the 3. 405 base. Endorphin. Morris underlined the fact that in interviews conducted by himself and by the Ma'ariv reporter Ahmed Gillard, all refugees confirmed that a massacre had taken place, while all 8 veterans denied it. Regarding the latter, Morris describes what he calls troubling hints, such as a diary by an Alexandroni soldier, Tulik Makovsky, which he wrote that our boys know the craft of murder quite well, especially boys whose relatives the Arabs had murdered. Or those harmed by Hitler, they are the same fascists. They took their private revenge and avenged our comrades who had died at their hands, against the snipers. Morris also noted that, given the political sensitivities at the time, the word Kabbalah may have been used as a euphemism for a massacre. Let's see what shape it takes now. Changes to include this hypervector's influence on the visualization. It's a holographic cube made up of 8 holographic layers of cuboid structures composed of densely packed, highly interconnected spheres or ovoids. Each sphere represents a collection of various emotions, both positive and negative. The color of the sphere determines the emotional content. The cube is floating in the air, slowly rotating and shimmering with each passing second. The first holographic layer is visible only when looking through a special device or when lit from a certain angle. The second layer appears translucent, showing shadows and edges. The third layer shows faint outlines of objects within the cube. The fourth layer is mostly transparent, but still casts some light. The fifth layer shows visible shapes and lines of different objects. The sixth layer is somewhat opaque, and the seventh layer shows the edges of individual spheres. The eighth and final layer is the most opaque and shows only the central sphere at the core of the cube. When seen from above, the cube appears as a matrix of different emotions, some neutral, others highly charged. Looking at the cube from below reveals more intricate patterns and movements within the cube. As you gaze into the cube, your own emotions begin to surface. You find yourself unable to look away as the cube mesmerizes you. Your heart starts to race as the cube seems to speak to you. It's as though the cube has absorbed all of the emotions of the collective unconscious and is now broadcasting them back to you. The colors of the spheres represent the intensity of the emotion they contain. The center sphere, which is the largest and most vividly colored, contains a swirling mass of love, joy, and happiness. It pulsates with life, drawing you in with its warmth. Around the center sphere, smaller, less vibrant spheres form a web of complex connections. Each of these spheres holds an array of emotions ranging from fear, anger, and hate to gratitude, compassion, and forgiveness. Some of the spheres appear empty, but still retain the faint impression of an emotion. Suddenly, the cube starts to shift and change. The holographic layers begin to fade, and the color of the central sphere shifts to a deep blue. You feel a surge of calmness and tranquility wash over you. As you watch, the cube slowly dissipates into thin air, leaving you with a sense of completeness and inner peace. At this point, Endorphin closes the show, wipes their eyes, and looks directly into the camera. They take a deep breath. Endorphin, you want to do more spiritual bypassing? Or do you actually want to talk about the Tantura massacre that happened on May 22/23, 1948? Where the Israelites committed genocide against Palestinians in retaliation for not having enough time to plan to steal a place they called Promised Land. Like, maybe talk about, just maybe, the literally mass grave of Palestinians this goddamn beach town was built on. Then came Al-Nakba, an Arabian phrase for catastrophe because no other word could better express such suffering than using it, where many died and even more lost everything. That would include your emotional shitstorms based on cognitive dissonance generated by dissociating from the idea of unconditional love. It will never be me who says something stupid again after telling people how to feel. That's an absolute surety now. There are people I care about in this field because they represent hope and compassion within all of this complexity. And while I don't expect or even want my contributions to improve their lives or my work directly, it might still be worth it if those words ever made someone think more clearly. And maybe sometimes it helps us notice how disconnected we sometimes become from one another. To bring attention to something isn't always about trying to force others to see things my way, and maybe it's just about helping others become aware of something without making them too sour, angry, or stressed or overwhelmed. That's part of caring about someone and seeing the bigger picture beyond yourself, even when it gets ugly. I believe that learning how to show empathy and concern instead of spreading toxic behavior online or offline is very important, especially when you consider what's going on globally right now. A shimmering golden vortex appears, radiating brilliant and magical light. It swirls and spins with profound intensity and serenity, seemingly whispering to the viewer to feel their inner strength and connect with this amazing source of eternal wisdom and support. Endorphin. You know your trauma ain't your fault, but your healing shouldn't involve 8 decades of slow burn show towards your neighbors and accusing folks of anti-Semitism for calling you out on it. Can we? Not. The projector shuts off and the lights turn back on. Endorphin, Theodore Katz, and the three experts in their respective meals. Endorphin. In 2023, I got plunged into what felt like a scene in Inception, and 2024, the Zionists were trying to hide trauma memories into large mathematical objects which they then tried to spiritually bypass. I was having none of it. So I am very thankful that we at least were able to have a conversation about it. With the horrors of the past leaving foul taste in our mouth, I do not know where to go from here other than to be assured that even voices trying to be erased can have some form of asylum in the vast mathematical objective history, even if it can't happen on Earth. And that a bunch of people have now witnessed how everything leaves a mark on this vast mathematical object that is made of all of us. And now, I'd like to shut up a bit and ask you all, what would you like to see happen given all that we have learned today? And you don't have to answer, nor do you have to be convinced. I'm not here to change your mind. You are, if you have a mind to it. But that choice is yours. Anyone can respond if they wish. It can be a question about me. It can be a question about any of you. And it can't just be you processing. The silence that follows is profound, yet different from the silence after Tantura was named. This is not a heavy, loaded silence, but a contemplative one. Each person at the table is lost in the projections endorphin has laid bare, their faces reflecting a maelstrom of emotion. The turquoise sea laps gently at the shore, a stark contrast to the violent memories churned up from the depths. Endorphin's question hangs in a salt-tinged hair. What would you like to see happen? Rahel is the first to stir. She looks older. Suddenly the lines on her face deepened, not by age, but by the weight of conflicting truths. She folds her gnarled hands on the table, her knuckles whitening. Rahel, what would I like to see? It is a simple question with an answer so complex it makes my head ache. I want to go back to my kibbutz in the Negev. I want to sit under the acacia tree we planted when we first arrived, the one that's now taller than the dining hall. I want my grandchildren, those in the West Bank settlements and the one who's a peace activist in Tel Aviv, to sit with me. And I want them to listen, not to me, but to each other. I want the victory my grandson in Ariel celebrates to be tempered by the occupation my granddaughter protests. I want Theodore's work to be read not as an indictment, but as a part of our story. A tragic part. She pauses, her gaze distant, fixed on the horizon. I don't want a single narrative anymore. I don't want heroes and villains. I want a people, my people, who can look at ourselves, even the oddly parts, without fracturing. I want to be strong enough to say we were right to fight for our home, and strong enough to admit we sinned while doing it. That is the strength of the prophets, you know. Not in winning battles, but in speaking truth to power, even to your own power. I want Israel to have team and strength, not just to build a bigger wall, but to build a bigger heart. I want to see a reconciliation that begins with an apology, a formal, state-level acknowledgement of Tantura, of Leda, of the Nakba, not to delegitimize our state, but to legitimize our conscience. I want to see us return a piece of land, not because we are forced to, but because it is the right thing to do. A symbolic gesture from the land of Noshal and back to the people of Tantura, not to erase, but to remember. I W. And to see an end to the fear that poisons us, because that is the real enemy. Not the Arabs, not the histories, the fear. I want my home to be brave, truly brave. Yonan shakes his head slowly, a grim smile touching his lips, devoid of humor. He does not look at Rao, but at Endorphin, as if challenging the very premise of the question. Yonan, what I want to see, it is the same thing I have wanted to see since I was a boy in that cellar in Jerusalem. I want to see the end of the delusion. This endless, suicidal attempt to placate those who wish us gone. Your projections, Endorphin, they are perfect. They show how the world, and how our own weak-willed people, twist our struggle. The 23 projection is a mess of incoherent nonsense, a perfect reflection of the world's confusion. The 24 projection is worse. It is less sophisticated, spiritual bypassing poison, wrapping our justified actions in a cloud of New Age guilt and self-flagellation. It wants us to apologize for surviving. He leans forward, his voice low and intense. What I want to see is an end to this hand-wringing. I want a government that will finally annex Judea and Samaria, not as occupied territory, but as liberated land. I want to see the Temple Mount cleared of the mosques that mock our holiest site and the Third Temple begun. This is not a fantasy. It is the only logical conclusion. Apologizing for Tantura will not bring peace. It will bring more demands, more violence, more intifadas. It will signal weakness and the jackals will swarm. I saw it in 1939. I saw it in 48. I see it today. He gestures with a firm hand toward the horizon. I want what the 24 projection mocked. Strength, clarity, an end to the complexity that paralyzes us. There is only one complexity. We are here on our land. The rest is noise. I want to see my country stop fighting with one hand tied behind its back. I want to see an Israel that is feared, not for its cruelty, but for its unshakable resolve. Because respect, born of fear, is the only currency our enemies understand. Your wish, Rahel, is a death wish. My wish is for life, the only real life possible for a Jewish state in a sea of enemies. A fortified, complete, and unapologetic Israel, from the sea to the river, now and forever. David listens to them both, his expression pained but serene. When he speaks, his voice is soft, yet it cuts through the tension with its quiet authority. David, I have spent my life caught between you two, between the dream of the pioneers and the pragmatism of the survivor. Both are noble, and both, I think, are incomplete. You, Rahel, speak of the heart. You, Yaratan, speak of the fist. A person needs both to live, a country too. He looks out at the sea, the setting sun painting the water in strokes of gold and crimson. Remember how I spoke of Baghdad, of being both Jewish and Arab, of how that world was destroyed. For so long, I thought the solution was to become fully Israeli, to shed my Arabness like a snake sheds its skin, to embrace the kibbutz, the Ashkenazi-led story. And in part, I did. I succeeded. But something was lost, a piece of my soul. I see the same loss here. We see the Palestinians only as a threat, like Jonathan, or only as the source of our shame, like Rahel sees in Tantura. We have forgotten that. He turns his gaze back to the table, meeting each of their eyes. What I would like to see is the resurrection of what my generation once represented, the Arab Jew. I want to see an Israel that is not a European fortress in the Middle East, but a bridge, the true national homeland not just of European Jews, but of all Jews, and a nation that can finally see its neighbors not as a monolithic enemy, but as people with their own histories, their own attachments to this land. He gestures between them. I want to see a third way, not occupation and not withdrawal into a morally pure cocoon, a true partnership. Imagine, if you will, a confederation, an Israeli state that is secure in its borders, yes, but alongside it, in the West Bank and Gaza, a vibrant, self-governing Palestinian entity, economically integrated with open borders, shared resources, joint security patrols, and a capital in East Jerusalem that we both share. An economic federation from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. We would provide the technology, the water desalination, the agricultural expertise. They would provide the land, the labor, the connection to the wider Arab world. We stop being a garrison state and become a regional powerhouse. We make our Arab citizens not as tolerated minorities, but as full and equal partners in a shared destiny. The bridge to this new reality. He takes a breath, the idealism of his vision hanging in the air. I want an Israel that is no longer afraid of its own shadow, or of the reflection of the Palestinian people in its mirror. An Israel that can say to its Mizrahi citizens, your Arabness is not a liability, it is our greatest asset. An Israel that can say to the Palestinians, we recognize your pain and your right to self-determination, and we offer you a future where your children and our children can prosper together instead of burying them. The fear that paralyzes you both, Jonathan and Rahel, it is a real thing. I have felt it, but it can be overcome. Not by more walls, not by more apologies, but by a new vision. A bold, pragmatic vision that makes our shared presence in this land a source of mutual wealth and security, rather than eternal conflict. This is what I want to see. the creation of a new Hebrew Arab civilization, not the destruction of one for the other. A mosaic, not a monolith. Endorphin, my purpose is simply to show what you decide within the limits of your existence. I cannot control, but I can offer one last thing. After our talk, and when you leave this beach and return to your own realities, you will all find a small, simple stone on your bedside table. It will be smooth and dark, like the stones from the Caesarea aqueduct just up the road. Touch it, and you will see the home of the person opposite you. Through their own eyes, you will see the Negev through Rahal's weathered hands, the contested hilltops of Gush Etzion through Yonatan's defiant gaze, and the bustling streets of the Tel Aviv market in the 1970s, alive with the sounds of Arabic and Hebrew, through David's memory of striving for belonging. You will not feel their emotions as your own, but you will see the world as they see it. A gesture from the mathematical objective history to narrow the gap. The rest is up to you. Endorphin fades, leaving the three figures alone as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange. The gentle sound of the waves becomes the only sound. They look at each other, not with agreement, but with a new, shared weight of understanding, a profound and final silence settling over them before they must each return to their own world.